Hello people and welcome to the Critical Focus channel and today's review of the Headsmen'S Curse. We will start with mentioning that there are a little bit of a plot thing going on with this warband. So we have the awaiting execution. If a fighter with a condemned counter would be given a condemned counter, that additional condemned counter is removed. We also have the Justice is served. When an enemy fighter with a condemned counter is taken out of action, gain one condemned counter. And the Well Executed. After a friendly fighter's attack action that takes an adjacent target out of action, gain one condemned counter for each of the following that are true. That attack action was supported, the target was a large fighter. So with that out of the way, let's look at the fighter cards. So the leader here, I'm also going to say that all of the fighters here have the flying trait, so there's no need for me to say it with every individual fighter. The leader is called Wielder of the Blade. He has a move characteristic of 4, a defense characteristic of 2 dodge, and a wound characteristic of 5. So he is actually a large fighter. He has a range 1 attack with 2 hammers for accuracy and 3 for damage. And it has the blade bound keyword, which means reaction. After this attack action takes the target out of action, place a friendly fighter that is out of action in a hex adjacent to this fighter. Then give that fighter 1 race counter and 1 wound counter. So the fighter being brought back will be 1 wound down. The inspired condition for this fighter reads, and for all of the fighters in this warband, after a power step you have 3 or more condemned counters. His inspired side reads 5 move, the other base stats are unchanged. His attack though goes from 3 damage to a staggering 4, so he is Mirkainan strong here. The blade bound reaction is unchanged as well, so that's quite a nasty fighter with 5 move, 2 dodge, 5 wounds and 4 damage. That just seems crazy. And then all of the other fights in this warband have the chain rasp keyword, so there will be a lot of cards here that are bound to chain rasps or affect chain rasp in specific ways. So that will not affect the leader then. So Bearer of the Block is next. He has a move characteristic of 4, 1 dodge, 4 wounds, and has the attack profile of 1, range 2 hammers, 2 damage. Quite straightforward. He also has the special text here, range 1 and range 2 attack actions made by a fighter supported by this fighter as cleave. That seems like something you will forget a lot. Enemy fighters adjacent to this fighter cannot be on guard as well. Inspired, his defense characteristic goes to 2 dodge, and his attack goes to 3 damage. So already quite a nasty warband here with a lot of damage output. Next up we have Scriptor of the Sentence. He is only 3 wounds. Otherwise, just like the Bearer, 4 move, 1 dodge, inspires to 2 dodge. He has a Furious Incitement attack, which is 3 range, 2 hammers, 1 damage, with the Condemn keyword. That specific keyword means that he can do a reaction after an activation step in which this fighter made this attack action. Does not need to succeed. Give the target 1 condemned counter. So that is obviously something that will get you closer to inspiring. Inspired, he as I said, goes to 2 dodge, attack gains stagger. Otherwise everything else is unchanged. Sharpener of the Blade is the last fighter here. He's only 2 wounds, but he's 2 dodge off the bat, so quite a bit dodgier there. He has the Sharpened Blade attack, which is 1 range, 2 swords, 1 damage, and he can also do the action Wet the Blade. Give this fighter or a friendly adjacent Wielder of the Blade, that is the leader, 1 wetted counter. Plus 1 damage to that fighter's next successful range 1 attack action for each of that fighter's wetted counters, and then remove that fighter's wetted counter. So that just means that the Wielder of Blade with only 1 wetted counter could potentially do 5 damage. I mean, that is quite nasty, but that requires an action to do, so it's a bit of give and take there. Inspired, he stays 2 dodge. He does not gain extra move, and actually none of the non-leader fighters gain extra move while inspired. Only the leader goes to 5 move. So 1 range, 3 swords, 1 damage instead of 2 swords, and also gains Grievous. So that's the fighters, so quite promising already. So let's check the search objectives here. First up we have Bound in Servitude, which reads: Search Hybrid, scores immediately after a friendly chain rasps attack action takes an enemy fighter out of action, or a friendly fight's attack action takes an enemy fighter out of action, and 1 or more friendly chain rasps supported that attack action. So we have 3 fighters that are chain rasps. It's not unlikely that one of them kills an enemy fighter, or like the leader is supported by one of these chain rasps. So it seems pretty straightforward, right? But we'll anyway check what helps us achieve this. Drawn to the kill, for example, choose a friendly fighter, push the chosen fighter 1 hex. After this push, that fighter must be adjacent to one or more enemy fighters. That could help set up the support. Helping Hands. In the first attack action made by a friendly fighter, in the next activation, attacker is considered to be supported by 1 additional supporting fighters. Yeah, also hold them still. Play this after friendly fight's move action. If they are adjacent to 1 or more enemy fighters, choose another friendly fighter. The chosen fighter makes 1 move action. After that move action, the chosen fighter must be adjacent to 1 or more of those enemy fighters. This all helps us very much so in scoring that objective. We have also, just in case, choose a friendly fighter, push the chosen fighter 1 hex towards the nearest enemy fighter with 1 or more wounds and or condemned counters. That would also help us. So it's a lot of strong free moves and pushes also in this deck. Also, Lurking Crony. When a friendly fighter adjacent to this fighter makes an attack action, this fighter supports that fighter. So even if they're only adjacent to the friendly fighter and not the enemy fighter, that counts still as a support, so that also helps score Bound in Servitude. So given all the cards here we have to help us score this card, which isn't all that hard from the get-go anyway, it's a super strong card for this Warband. Next up we have Eager Assistant, and this is worth 2 glories, or 2 bounty as it were. Search. Score this immediately after the second or subsequent successful supported attack action made by friendly fights in the same phase. And so, already mentioned all that stuff that can help us score this. This seems really easy. You don't need to kill the second fighter or anything like that. You just need to do the second successful supported attack action. Yeah, that's a pretty strong card as well. Gather a Crowd. Scores immediately after an activation step if 3 or more friendly fights are within 2 hits of the same enemy fighter. This is a bit so-so, given that we only have 4 fighters. So yeah, we can bring stuff back and stuff like that, but it's gonna be quite a bit harder of an objective. It's not unscorable, given that they can come back, or if we just draw it early, right? But we really want to get this card out fairly early to help score us this card. But it could be a dead card in some cases. Heads will roll, scores immediately after you gain your 3rd or subsequent condemned counter. Yeah, so we can get a condemned counter by doing the scripter's attack, right? Yeah, because he doesn't even need to hit to deal out those condemned counters. 3rd or subsequent condemned counter. So what helps us more score the condemned stuff? So killing large fighters, for example, or assisting. Condemned step forward, choose 2 fighters that are adjacent to each other. 1 or more of which is an enemy fighter. Place each fighter in the hex that was occupied by the other fighter when you chose them. Give each chosen enemy fighter 1 condemned counter. Damning Scream is restricted to the scriptor. Choose an enemy fighter within 2 hits of the friendly scriptor of the sentence. Stagger the chosen fighter and give the chosen fighter 1 condemned counter. Roaming Witness. Choose a friendly chain rasp. Remove the chosen fighter from the battlefield and place the chosen fighter on an edge hex, then give the chosen fighter 1. Charged Token. If that friendly fighter is adjacent to 1 or more enemy fighters, give each of those enemy fighters 1 condemned counters. That also helps us. Scapegoat. Choose an enemy fighter. The chosen fighter has a wound characteristic of 5 unless it would be higher. So if we kill someone with 5 wounds, we get condemned counters, right? So if we are sure to deal out the damage needed, that could also help us. It's a bit weird card to boost enemy wound characteristic, but yeah, makes sense for the Warband, right? Swift Judgment, +1 move. A reaction uses after this fighter's move action if this fighter moved through 1 or more hexes that each contain an enemy fighter. Choose one of those enemy fighters, give the chosen fighter 1 condemned counter, and break this card. and that helps us. That's about it. So it seems pretty doable. It's 3 condemned counters, so it's not going to be super fast objective, but it's very doable. And then we have Off with Her Head. Scores immediately after friendly leader's attack action takes an enemy fighter out of action. Gain 1 additional glory if that enemy fighter was a leader. So basically Victoria's duel with a twist. Yeah, pretty strong, right? We have a very, very potent fighter in the leader here, and he's not likely to die anytime soon, so pretty strong card. Quick to Judge, scores immediately after an activation step if there is a surviving friendly leader, and 2 more enemy fighters each have 1 condemned counter. Yeah, having the leader alive shouldn't be too hard, and 2 more enemy fighters having condemned counters seems pretty doable with all the previously mentioned cards as well. So let's look at the end phases. All Rise. It's worth 2 glory, scores in an end phase if 2 more friendly fights each have 1 or more race counters, or 1 or more enemy fights are out of action and 1 or more friendly fights each have 1 or more race counters. So 1 enemy fighter out of action and 1 friendly fighter having a race counter. That seems really doable for 2 glory. Basket of Bones. Scores in an end phase if 2 more enemy fights out of action. Straightforward, 1 glory. Pretty doable, just 1 glory though. An easy glory to get things going. Judge. Lest ye be judged. Scores in an end phase if each surviving friendly fighter has 1 or more move tokens and or charge tokens. Yeah, that's pretty easy. 4-man warband. Maybe you don't want to go moving around too much. You probably will want to use the scripter a couple of times to get those condemned counters out. But it's very, very, very doable, and it's a straightforward card that seems to be included in every warband nowadays. And we also have stuff to do free moves with fighters, so we could get them to have move counters without actually spending activations to do so. Savoring the Inevitable. Scores in the end phase if a friendly fighter is adjacent to 1 or more enemy fighters, and 1 or more of those enemy fights each have 1 or more wound and or condemned counters. Very, very easy and straightforward, but it's just 1 glory, so pay attention to your total glory. You don't want to be straying too far below 15-16 glory. The Triumph of Death. Scored in an end phase if there are 1 of you who are surviving enemy fighters, and there are 2 more surviving friendly fighters. For 3 glory. It's basically 3rd end phase, right? But it can be scored in any end phase. Given that we can raise fighters and this warband is pretty lethal, so if you're going full on aggro, this should probably be included. Tools of Death. Scores in an end phase if 3 or more surviving friendly fighters each have 1 or more upgrades. 3 or more surviving friendly fighters each have 1 or more upgrades. So you need to have 3 surviving fighters. It's a bit of a gamble, and racing with this warband isn't super easy. We need to kill with a leader. I'm a bit dubious on it for deck building purposes. It's certainly doable. I'm gonna lean on a pass there for deck building purposes. So let's look at the ploys. Condemned Step Forward. Choose 2 fighters that are adjacent to each other, 1 or more of which is an enemy fighter. So at least 1 needs to be an enemy fighter. Place each fighter in the hex that was occupied by the other fighter when you chose them. Give each chosen enemy fighter 1 condemned counter. So you only give condemned counters to the enemy, or 1 of the enemies if you choose 2 enemies. Yeah, it's a very usable card for this warband. Obviously, we will want to include everything that can give us condemned counters. And switching around fighters can be potent in and of itself, so it's a strong card, right? Damning Scream. It's restricted to the scripter. Choose an enemy fighter within 2 hexes of a friendly scripter. That's fairly close for a fighter we kind of will want to keep out of harm's way. Stagger the chosen fighter and give the chosen fighter 1 condemned counter. Yeah, the scripter will want to be staying fairly far back, but it's bound to happen, I guess. It's just a 3 wound fighter with 1 dodge off the bat, so we really want to get him inspired to help boost his survivability. But we might need to include it for the condemned counters. It's a bit of a gamble card though. Drawn to kill, choose a friendly fighter, push the chosen fighter 1 hex. After this push, the fighter must be adjacent to 1 or more enemy fighters. Yeah, very strong card. Pushes are immensely strong. Helping Hands. In the first attack action made by a friendly fighter, in the next activation, the attacker is considered to be supported by 1 additional friendly fighter. So if we have no supporting fighters, you will still have 1 supporting fighter. So single support will work. If you already have 1 supporting fighter, you will have single and double support for that attack. So And it helps score us Bound in Servitude. It helps get us Condemned counters because we need to make assisted attacks. So it's an auto-include for this Warband. Hold them still. Reaction, play this after friendly fights move action if they are adjacent to one or more enemy fighters. So move could be a charge, right? Choose another friendly fighter. The chosen fighter makes one move action. After that move action, the chosen fighter must be adjacent to one or more of those enemy fighters. So helps set up support to get condemned counters and scores cards, and helps get us moving with every fighter, which will score us judge lest ye be judged. Just in case, choose a friendly fighter, push the chosen fighter 1 hex towards the nearest enemy fighter with one or more wound or condemned counters. So again, it's a push, include it. It's great. Roaming Witness, choose a friendly chain rasp, remove the chosen fighter from the battlefield, and place the chosen fighter on an edge hex. Then give the chosen fighter 1 charge token. So we could do it to someone already being charged, as to not hamper ourselves too much. Or it could also help score that card that everyone needs to remove a charge. And lastly, but not leastly, it gives the fighters adjacent to them after that move a condemned counters. And potentially we could give more than one condemned counter here, because after they are placed in the edge hex, if the friendly fighter is adjacent to one or more enemy fighters, give each of those enemy fighters one condemned counter. So it's a pretty good card here. Scapegoat, choose an enemy fighter. The chosen fighter has a wound characteristic of 5 unless it would be higher. This effect persists until the end of the round. Give the chosen fighter 1 stagger and 1 condemned. So both get to stagger and condemn them, and that will make them large, so we get a condemned if we kill them. So that's pretty nice, right? So yeah, it's a bit weird to boost the wound characteristics of enemy fighters, and maybe the condemning is redundant, but I am leaning on including it. Unseemly Haze is +2 move to friendly fights in the next activation. You cannot reroll attack dice in friendly fights attack roll in next activation. That's too bad, but +2 move is always very useful for aggro warbands. And all of the fights except the leader only have, it's still a good move characteristic, but they only have 4. So it's certainly useful. You must serve, place a friendly chain rasp that's out of action on a starting hex in your territory, give that fighter 1 raise counter, then if there are 4 surviving friendly fighters, give that fighter wound counters until that fighter is vulnerable. Yeah, but we need to get stuff back, certainly to score that Triumph of Death, to not have less than 2 surviving friendly fighters. So it's an auto-include, right? Bringing people back is always very, very strong. So let's check the upgrades. Death to Mercy gives the fighter ensnare. Not really a fan, it's just 1 symbol on the die. If I were to build a deck, I would never include stuff that only gives ensnare. Next up is Enduring Executor, +1 wound. Obviously very strong and useful. Ethereal Immunity is rolls of double support or successes in this fight's defense roll. It's just 1 symbol. I probably wouldn't include it. Yeah, sure, everyone has 2 defense dice aspired, but it's just 1 symbol, so I'm not really a fan. Next up we have Guided Blows. You can reroll 1 attack dice in this fight's attack roll. That's more like it. That's very good, especially for that leader attack. It's just 2 hammers, so we need a bit of boost on the accuracy there. Job Satisfaction, reaction after an activation step in which this fighter made 1 or more attack actions. Give this fighter 1 guard token. Guard is decent when we are dodge and have 2 defense dice, so I'm leaning on including it. Swift Judgment, +1 move. Reaction, use this after this fight's move action if this fighter moved through 1 or more hexes that contained an enemy fighter. So we are all flying, so we can do that. Choose one of those enemy fighters, give that chosen fighter 1. Condemn counter, then break this card. It's too bad that we get to break the card, but dealing out extra condemn counters could be useful. And the move certainly helps as well. So yeah, it's not amazing, but probably included. Cackling Nightmare, reaction after an activation step in which this fighter made 1 or more range 3 plus attack actions. This fighter makes a range 3 attack action. And that's for the scripter. That's amazing, because we could potentially then, well, not potentially, we will deal out 2 condemned counters. That's very, very strong. Include that card. Chilling Grasp, enemy fights adjacent to this fighter cannot make move actions. I can certainly see uses for this card. Would I include it? Maybe. I would have to playtest it. It's not out to include for me. I'm not super impressed, but maybe it's stronger than I make it out to be. The shielding grasp it cannot be attached to the leader either. So I mean, +1 damage to the chain grasps, certainly usable, right? It's 3 of the fighters, so it's not really a huge restriction. Lurking Crony. When a friendly fighter adjacent to this fighter makes an attack action, this fighter supports that fighter. I mentioned this card earlier, so it helps score us bound in servitude, it helps get us condemned counters, so even if they are not actually supporting in the regular sense, they will be with this card. It's a bit situational though, so I'm not sure it's really necessary. But yeah, that's it. I mean, overall, I think this warband seems really, really strong. I think they can be quite abusive, and I would like to see them going up against something equally strong or menacing like Drippers or like the Null Spears pack or something really, really nasty. So let me know what you think of this warband. Is it overpowered? Is it balanced? Do you like playing with it if you've already tried it out? And let me know what you think of the game overall. Is it in a good place, or is Magic Buster or whatever? So let's smash that like button, and let's subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that bell button as to not miss out any further content here from the channel. And so without further ado, take care. Bye.